So welcome to everyone that just joined us. And I'm really excited to have my friend and fabulous research, Maheen, on the call. Hi, Maheen.
Hi.
So I'd love for you to tell people how you got to where you are today at one of the most prominent institutions and at the Veterans Administration working on TBI.
Okay, so I'll have to go back a really long time ago. So I am originally from Karachi, Pakistan, and I came here when I was 19, and I came as an international student. So I came from a family where I was pushed to excel at mainly at whatever I did. My father was a very big supporter of feminism and three brothers, and just was very interested in biology from way back when. I came here at 19 and I actually went to UC Irvine for neurobiology. And I also did a bachelor's in women's studies, which was fascinating to me because I learned a lot about Western feminism and realized early on that there was a lot of work to do in order to understand the difference between sex and gender and how it can apply to different cultures. From UC Irvine, I went to USC, University of Southern California, for my PhD in neuroscience, and then got my postdoctoral fellowship in the psychiatry department at Stanford University. And I also worked at the VA Palo Alto starting when I was a postdoc. And I kind of just stayed there throughout that time. I was about 10 years in psychiatry at Stanford. And then I was working with the VA during this time as well. I worked with the War Related Illness and Injury Study Center. I worked with the Alzheimer's group at Stanford and at the VA. Then, about 5 years ago, I switched to the neurosurgery department at Stanford and the polytrauma rehabilitation service at the VA Pro, which is under Dr. Odette Harris, who was a co-author on the article in Brain Injury Professional. And I've been studying traumatic brain injury. I was the former research director for the Defense and Veterans Brain Injury Center. Been studying traumatic brain injury, but from a perspective of a neuroscientist. My PhD is neuroscience, so I'm not a clinical person. I am what's called the basic neuroscientist who can talk your ears off at a cocktail party about certain areas in the brain and how amazing it is to have a brain, and it's the best organ in the body and there's nothing competitive at all. So I'm one of those people, and I've been using all of my research education in order to translate research that I do into the clinical realm. Some of my best friends are clinical psychologists, neurologists, and biostatisticians and computer scientists. So I work with a very diverse group of people, and they all tolerate me, which is really nice.
One of the
And
one of the things I just want to explain to people, which I didn't realize till I was out there, is Stanford gave a section of land to the VA, if I have this correct, to build the Palo Alto VA. So it is actually part of the Stanford system. So that's where you get these amazing professors that go back and forth between Stanford / Palo Alto VA. So these if you can see the strength of that relationship in the story of how you came to work with veterans.
that's true. Yes, it's been an incredibly rewarding experience, not just because of the resources that I'm able to access through all these different systems, the mentorship I've had, and also the collaborators and the colleagues that I have access to. I'm just very blessed.
And what were you first originally working with male veterans? When did the interest, and you had your women's studies background, but when did the TBI women's drift into your work?
So I have to give credit to a few people for this. Even though I did my bachelor's in women's studies, I've been a very, I don't mean to sound, um, there's a little bit of feedback, I think. Can you hear me? Yes.
You're just fine.
Um, so when I did my PhD in neuroscience, I was and I still about 10 years ago, I was an incredibly objective person. So I didn't believe in anything that was hard to measure. So let's put it that way. So I was like, give me an EEG recording, give me a neuroimaging, give me the galvanic skin response. Everything has to be, quantitative and qualitative measures. I just didn't understand. It was hard for me to understand self-report measures. And now, because I'm older and because I've done a lot more research, I realize how important it is to address environment, how important it is to address the structure of the brain that is so plastic. And so, in my understanding of how I was when I was an undergrad and I was doing my women's studies major, I was always interested in women's issues more from a social, cultural, and political aspect. When I started working with Dr. Odette Harris about 6 years ago now, she has always been really interested in the epidemiological aspects of this. And she actually asked me to analyze some data. And it was about 6 years ago. So, and then I started really getting into it. So what I brought to the table was more taking it a step further into looking at brain differences that happen with brain injury in men and women, and then also looking at the differences that are important when you're treating women for certain problems versus men. So my interest really in looking at my own data, plus my data accumulated. So earlier on, I didn't have that much data. So now I have enough data that I can look at these things. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, no, definitely. And Odette is such a force. Uh, a woman of color, came up through the VA, Stanford. And what is her official title? I know she's the first African American woman to hold the.
Well, I think so. So right now she is full professor, in neurosurgery, and she's also, I think, deputy chief of staff in rehab at the VA Palo Alto. So, in essence, you look at how she's also looking at brain injury from the Stanford side, and then she's also looking at it from the VA side, and which is what I try to do as well. And no matter what my mechanisms are, because currently I'm looking at neuromodulation, which is brain stimulation. I'm looking at neuroimaging, technology, everything that I have. My interest is towards looking at these two factors, men. So
Odette Harris had an article that was covered in Stars and Stripes in 2012. And I called her up to get an appointment. It took me like 3 weeks to get a call, but I had a call with her and I said, "Thank you so much for studying women and brain injury. I just started this organization called Pink Concussions." And she said, "Well, I wasn't looking for it." She said, "But we found these differences so profound when we looked at soldiers, and soldiers happen to be made up of men and women." And I think that's so important because if you're only looking at football players, you're not going to see sex differences because the women aren't there. If you're only looking, at white 50-year-old men that happen to be in the pool that you're looking at, you're not going to see the sex differences. So I think that leads into the paper that you just recently published. I'd love for you to talk about the paper.
sure. I wanted to specifically talk about these things, but I wanted to put a big caveat on top of it because one of the things that has really come out from the fact that we have been in a pandemic and we're doing this all together on Zoom instead of hanging out together and seeing each other below the waist, which now I go out and I'm like, oh my God, I'm seeing people below the waist, which is amazing. So
You have legs.
um, I know you have legs. So I think what's really been putting it a big umbrella term on this is that underrepresented minorities is really, really big. So we have the sex difference. We have men and women, and of course, transgender and other different categories. But we also have the racial and ethnic minorities. And on top of that, we also have social economic factors. And some of the things that have really been highlighted in the pandemic is how many people are suffering from a double whammy or an additive effect. So a Hispanic woman who is living in low SES is going to have more is more likely to have COVID, and also is more likely to be have mental illnesses. So because of the stress and depression and all the mental illness that's been going on with the pandemic. Now add brain injury on top of that, or you can start from brain injury. So the idea is that it's just a compounding effect of all these things. So what we did in February, before the pandemic, of course, we published a paper in which we looked at the symptomology reported by the female veterans in our polytrauma division. So we are one of the 5 polytrauma centers at the VA, and we looked at just the data from our polytrauma site, and we looked at what the symptom reporting was after brain injury for women versus men. This was published in February 2020. It's actually written about in the brain injury professional article. And we did a specific analysis in which we matched people. So this is another way to do, I'm maybe preaching to the choir to a lot of researchers that are on this call. We matched our sample with the age at which they acquired the brain injury, the mechanism of injury, and the time from the injury. And when we matched male and females, we really found out that there was a moderate effect of sex on the post-concussive symptoms, but what was pronounced was a significant effect on lower cognitive abilities in women, which is quite interesting because we're very interested in how traumatic brain injury is associated with aging and how it can develop into cognitive decline. So what we found was that women were reporting more memory problems than men. We also found women were living more alone than men, and women, even though they had the same education level, were not employed or were not actively looking for employment as much as men. That's just an R sample. So we ended up doing another study, which is being revised at the moment. We looked at brain thickness, cortical thickness of men and women in the same sample. And we looked at how the cortical thickness changes between men and women. So what I wanted to find out is like a biological substrate change.
And these are live people. These are MRI.
Yes, so yes. This is MRI. So that's one of the what I do for a living, I guess, is I do brain imaging, and you can see my background is from Society for Neuroscience. And that's what I use for my work background. I'm actually hanging out inside a mouse hippocampus at home. So, so you can see that this is the seat for memory, which is the hippocampus. So I do imaging, I do MRIs, and we looked at all these different MRIs. You can get a clinical MRI, and you can also get different types of advanced neuroimaging based on your research. We just looked at a clinical MRI, and we were able to process to find out how the cortex thickness changes in men and women after they go through brain injury. And we found that particularly before you get brain injury, like in a control sample, women have thicker cortex than men by about, what is it, 6 to 11%? I can't remember. That's we just start out with the thicker cortex. Now, I'm not saying anything what that means and how it's associated with anything. I'm just giving you something that is reported. And so after brain injury, what we found was that there was more cortical atrophy in certain areas of the brain, including frontal executive and also the limbic system, which is responsible for emotional tasks.
That's what they call green, right?
Exactly. So they had more atrophy in women than in men. Now remember, they're matched on mechanism of TBI. They're matched on how far the TBI was in time. So in my way of thinking of it, what we thought is that if they're starting at the same point, but their atrophy is staying and men are recovering, and there's more report of some psychiatric issues, more report of memory loss in women. So there's something here. So, so the idea is that you have to use different ways to measure different techniques to get at different variables so that you can explain the variance. So we explain the variance by looking at symptomology, then we try to explain it by looking at cortical thickness. So we're trying to look at different things so we can kind of see a whole picture of what is going on so we can develop better targets. So that's what the paper was about, the first two papers.
And by target, you mean treatment targets of.
Yes, so I can talk about that as well if that's
Yeah, so often we don't get to the treatment part because I mean brain injury is such still an emerging science, which is I think one of the reasons why I can be an expert in it as a social worker in the lane that I'm in is because it is emerging. We are still just getting to the root of how these cells are made up in the brain. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And because of I mean, I have to talk about the pandemic because it's just changed everything. Literally, scientists are publishing on like media guidelines, right? Media timelines. We're publishing, we're writing, we're doing studies, we're writing grants. I mean, our lives have completely changed. And not so much in the sense that we are working from home or going into work twice a week or something like that. Our way of thinking, our delivery of care has changed, our hypothesis building has changed. We have to think of ways to do research that addresses how we deliver the care, how do we deliver the research. And when you're doing expensive research like asking people to go into the scanner, how are you going to get them in the scanner if there's a pandemic going on? So what are the different things that you're going to look for? Are you going to look for the chronic effects or the long haulers or the long COVID? And so one of the things that we decided to do was do an international survey. So we did my lab, and we did a survey, an international survey, and we started it in March, and we only did it for 18 days. And we did an international survey. We did it through social media and email and everything. And basically, we wanted to find out what the perceived stress level was across the world during the first quarantine sit in place. It was very interesting. We were able to get 11 countries. We reached out to as many countries as we could, and we were very proud of the fact that we were able to do this without using any Amazon Turk or anything like that. So we actually got 1,700 responses in like, I don't know, 11 or 15 days. I can't remember. It's about to be published. It's being revised at the moment. And we were able to show that the perceived stress level across the world using a standardized measure was higher than normal. Yes, it was higher than the moderate, but it was higher in women than it was in men across the world. The 11 countries that I looked at. It was, there were other important findings in there, like Germany had lower stress level, Pakistan had lower stress level, Mexico had lower stress level. But across the world, women were feeling more stress than men. And that was really interesting at that point. And then I started looking at all the other surveys, and everybody was reporting the same thing. And women just had all these added things on their plate. Like I had to lock my door for an hour telling my daughter, don't disturb me, I'm doing a live thing, because there's always a knock on the door. And I always have to, go, I'm a mom. So it's important for me. I can't just say, go to dad. Although I do that sometimes as well. But so the idea is that it's very interesting that we talk about all the additional things that have happened to women in the past, the 9 months we've been in this. When I felt it, I don't have a brain injury. I may do some not normal things, but I don't have a clinical condition. I felt the stress to the point that I was going crazy. And so when I did the survey and I found this, I was very interested to talk to people about why this was. And the factors, but you really don't know how they interact. Then you have to look at, again, the social economic factors, the race and ethnicity, and you have to figure out what you can do about it. Every time you write a grant now at NIH or DoD or VA, again, I'm maybe preaching to the choir, they have a section called translational research. What you find, what are you going to do about it? So I was talking to a couple of collaborators, and one of them is actually a dean at a very prominent school of public health. And she said something incredible to me, and it stuck in my head. She said, for 5-year grants that you write and you get your data in 5 years and you write a translational plan, can you actually change someone's race? And I said, no. Can you actually change their ethnicity? I'm like, no. Can you change their income? That's a little bit more malleable. Yes, maybe they will increase maybe in 5. What can you change? What is it about your research that can translate to something that will affect public policy, to something that would affect treatment, to something that create a target? So if I find areas in the brain that are thinner or can correlate with certain neuropsych measures, what does that mean? Does it matter? I mean, what am I giving to the community? So what we find, we need avenues to push this information forward. And the reason why is because treatment is incredibly important, and our treatment is based mostly on men. Everybody knows that. So here's a very good example. Today, actually last night, I saw this picture of the 3 former presidents taking vaccine in public, and to say that they're going to take it as soon as it's available. And I was like, this is fantastic. I love all 3 of them. Okay, that's great. But they're men.
And they're white.
Well, Obama is half white, right? But so to me, immediately, because, Katherine, thanks for spreading the word, right? And thanks to a dad, and thanks for all my training. I was like, this is really cool. But wouldn't it be nice to see some 3 women standing there saying, we're taking the vaccine and we're going to tell you how our body reacts to it. It's just a simple thing. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it didn't hit anybody else. But so we know from our research from before, right? So you can stop me anytime you want, because I just keep talking. But we know from our research from neurobiology and addiction and depression and sleep that medications are processed differently in women than they are in men. Just taking a medication. So why is that? Well, we have a different acidity level in our stomach, and we have a different way of absorption. I mean, I'm not saying the different doesn't mean bad or good. What it means is that if I take a medication, it's going to get absorbed faster, which means I'm going to take more of it. So that means I have more, I might get addicted more. Men, it takes a longer time for it to get absorbed. So they may die of an overdose because they'll keep taking it to get that effect. So this is just something, and of course there's pros and cons of this, and there's articles that are published that are for this and against this. So I'm just giving you an umbrella view of what I know. So we know that. So, okay. So how did that come about? That came about because there was research that was done in sex differences for those medications. We're developing new treatments. We have innovative things going on, but there's no push on trying to figure out what the response is in men and versus women. I'll give you an example.
Well, and just please clarify, these are treatments for people with brain injury, and we're looking for who should get what treatment, how much of that treatment should they get, and when should they get it, and what treatments work best for men versus women.
Exactly. So it all started because of the term precision medicine, right? So years ago when that came about. And so we want to make sure that we are looking closely at the differences in men and women in whatever treatment that we are giving them. So my field, again, obviously I'll give you an example of my field. So traumatic brain injury. One of the things that I do is I stimulate the brain. So I use repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation. It's an expensive procedure. Right now, if you're doing a clinical trial, it's also available in for the civilians. And so I do it in, I've been doing it in veterans and I have clinical trials, and it's a non-invasive procedure. And you basically stimulate a certain area of the brain, FDA approved. It's you have to go through a lot of regulatory approval, and you have to do it certain, there's different protocols. You can do it 2 3 times a day for 20 minutes for 20 days. Certain frequencies are used, and it's very and it's shown to be effective in certain things like OCD, depression. I use it for traumatic brain injury because traumatic brain injury is also associated with um, different comorbidities of depression and PTSD. So I use it so in a certain brain area so I can have better quality of life, better cognition, as well as lower rates of lower reports of depression, PTSD.
Now, Maheen, it's a paddle that they put towards sections of your head. It's a helmet. I can't remember because I think you had the machine when we were at the Stanford Concussion Center conference.
Yes, actually, I asked. Yes, I was there, and I brought the machine with me with the vendor. Actually, so it's basically a computer that's attached to a delivery system. So it's an electromagnet, and it's in the shape of a eight-shaped coil. And what it is basically it's that electromagnet that you made when you were in fifth grade. You took a nail and you wrapped a coil around it, and then it has this wonderful, powerful electromagnet. So it delivers magnetic, it creates a magnetic field on top of your skull. So it creates a magnetic field on top of the skull in a certain area of the skull that you've targeted using an MRI. And when you have a high strength magnetic field on top of the skull, it actually can go through the skull into your brain, and it can create electricity between neurons and increased neurotransmitter release. So it kind of gets converted from your magnetic strength into an electricity into the brain. And we think,
Is that similar to in PT? You have a muscle where they attach electrodes and run an electrode through a particular muscle in
so
PT?
that's electricity, yes. So EMG, yes. So this is non-invasive. So what we did, we do magnetic stimulation. So there's also transcranial direct stimulation. So that's direct cortical stimulation with current, right? And then there's also deep brain stimulation, which is done a lot in Parkinson's disease. So that's invasive. So you actually have to open up the brain, do surgery, and put electrodes in. Very good for Parkinson's disease, has proven to be very effective in Parkinson's patients. Here's a little tidbit. DBS, deep brain stimulation, is recommended to men more than women.
Based on research that it's better for men, or based on?
I can give you a citation of the paper. So now, again, how many women develop Parkinson's? How many go to that level where they're needed? How many go and are have comorbidities that may, I mean, I don't know, but this is in the this is a citation that I actually put in this scoping review that I just did, in which I looked at sex differences in treatment trials for women for brain injury. It's interesting that well, first of all, this non-invasive neuromodulation is kind of new, right? So it's not as old as taking medications for depression and things like that. But at the same time, when we did the scoping review, what we found is after we did all the cleaning up of the review, we had like 500 articles, and then I did it with my then postdoc, Dr. Phillips, and also my master's student at this point who's applying for clinical psychology, Saurabh Sami. And that paper, basically, we did this scoping review in which, after we cleaned up the data, we had like 57 papers that looked at these 3 different types of stimulations. One is the one I do, which is magnetic. The other was current, TDCS, and the third was deep brain stimulation. So non-invasive to slightly invasive to really invasive. what we found, I just have to tell you the numbers. What we found was we categorized them into 4 different ways. We said we're going to look for a paper that actually reports and discusses men and women. So we called it RD. They report it and they discuss it. Then we say we will categorize the papers for people who reported it and didn't discuss it.
Right.
And then we said, okay, maybe we'll also categorize papers in which they have just one single case for a woman. And then we'll also categorize with papers in which they didn't report it at all. I had this idea to do this paper because I went to a conference for neuromodulation, and there were so many men there. I felt completely like, oh my God, there's like no women here. But they had a committee for women. And I joined that committee. And I had this idea about 1.5 years ago that if you're doing this non-invasive stimulation in the brain, why are women not a big part of it? So when we did this review paper, we found out that 2/3 of the paper, so we only found 54 studies, 2/3 of them were men. There was no, obviously, there's no transgender. That's even asking for a lot. 47 papers reported it, but did not discuss it.
Meaning
And
they reported to having men and women, but there was no sex difference on the other end. And
they
that's
didn't,
a funding issue that you have to, for NIH, put men and women in your study, but you don't have to report on the sex differences on the back end of your study.
So that's a big issue. Then that's what we put in our review. We recommended some guidelines on how to do this. So if you're just putting in, everyone has a table 1 in their paper, and they say male, female. That's it. They don't go like, they don't talk about any differences. They just report it. Now, papers that did report it and discuss it, kudos to them. 7. We had 7 papers who did that. Yay! And then we had no study reported sex. This is just neuromodulation studies. No study reported sex as a covariate in their outcome. Now, I'm not saying I'm not guilty of this. Okay, I come from a very basic science, neuroscience. I mean, I grew up thinking brain is everything. There's no difference, right? So that's who I was 10 years ago. I've changed a lot. And mostly because, you know, things you just learn, and my colleagues have educated me. And so nobody actually reported it in their analysis either. Now, why is that? A lot of the times studies say that, oh, you're just going to respond in the same way as a man. So why even report it? Why waste the money? Because clinical trials are expensive, pharmaceutical trials are expensive. The other thing is pregnant women have always been like, oh, you're childbearing age, you're pregnant, you're a vulnerable population. We can't put you to do this. So a lot of the times sex is just reported as a variable in demographics. So I found that very, very interesting.
It's what an important paper that is to show in this one very promising treatment how women, even with targeted health and NIH funding around sex as a biological variable, that you're seeing papers. What was the span of years on those papers? Like the last.
So we did. Let me see. I actually have these notes in front of me, so I hope that. So I wanted to be correct in exact numbers. So we looked at between 2001, 2020, and we stopped in February of 2020.
Wow, that's amazing. So this is current work. We're not looking at work
current.
from the 60s. Yeah.
So yeah, go ahead.
Well, we are wrapping up on our time. I knew you and I would blow through 30 minutes really fast. I did want to open it up. If you guys want to turn your cameras on and we're so excited to have between 80 and 90 people have stayed on this call, which is amazing. Really appreciate it. We could keep on talking the next 5 minutes. I did want to see if anybody had a question. You could unmute yourself and ask a question. So I'll keep quiet for a second if anybody would like to ask Maheen a question.
Hi, Maheen. My name is Flechelle Morena. How are you?
Good, good. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. I have a thought, and I don't know what you would think about that, but with the understanding that the corpus callosum is bigger in women and in men, and in layman language, it's known as being the highways for information to pass back and forth between the left and the right brain hemispheres. Do you think that it might be one of the reasons why women report more memory issues and executive function issues, because they may actually be more in touch with their brain hemisphere functions in general? So maybe they might feel more their decline? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very good question, and it's a very it's actually a very intricate question. So I want to give examples from both sides. So one of the things in terms of cognitive tasks, one of the things that has been reported before is that men are better at spatial memory in terms of coordinates or numbers, and women are better at landmarks. So if you ask my husband, this is just exactly how it is in my family. You ask my husband for directions, he will say, go north, go east, and go this. And I don't get that. I can never get that. I say, okay, go to the Safeway, make a right, and then go next to the liquor store and go. So I use landmarks. He uses coordinates. It's also been shown that women are better at verbal capabilities than men. So men are, we know that from all kinds of, media shows that they say that women are better at. So in fact, one of the things that I was actually asked at one of the seminars that I was talking at by a neurosurgeon was, he looked at me and he said, well, if women are reporting more, is just because they talk too much. And so I looked at it and I said, I think that memory can easily be can that question can easily be addressed if you normalize by your verbal ability, and you also look at the memory function and you separate it from the verbal ability. The other important factor is that different brain regions. So if you are more verbal, then I know how the hemispheric interactions are. So you're more of what's called a left brain person versus the right brain person. And the suggestion is that maybe it's because they have more interhemispheric connections going on, so they're more aware of it. So there is literature out there that doesn't particularly address this, but it addresses another special branch of cognitive science called skill learning. So if you're an expert at something, say a chess player or a piano player or a pilot, if you perform at a very high level, if you go below a certain very small standard deviation, you're going to notice it faster than someone who is not an expert. And that's a very important point. So if you, it has not, I don't think it has anything to do with this point. Again, I'm going back into my objective neuroscience. I don't think it has more to do with male and female. It has to do with what your individual capability is and how much you have utilized it and made it as part of your own functioning of every day. When you see a slight drop in it, you're going to actually be aware of it. That's why when you have this cognitive aging platforms, people who are very, very expert at something, when they fall, first they notice it first, and then they fall more drastically. So, and we call it like warding off effects of aging and things like that. So I hope I kind of answered the question, but I wanted to bring in different components to it, because once you take the variability into account of the cortical fibers and look at the different ways that we process our information and put our everyday function together, I think it really does depend on what you have used for your everyday function. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes, thank you. And thank you so much for your work. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Maheen, hi. This is Charlene Fontaine. I'm talking with you from San Diego. I so appreciate what you're doing. Thank you, thank you, thank you, especially for our veterans. They're my guys. and gals, okay? I'm the survivor, let me rephrase that. I'm the survivor of 2 traumatic brain injuries and 5 concussions. I had the stimulation stuff you're talking about. My doctors call me the miracle lady. And what you were just talking about with the skill learning is absolutely amazing to me. You just explained a missing chunk for me.
Oh,
No one
that's
could
wonderful.
explain it to me, so thank you. But I wanted to say that I would like to talk with you offline about the stimulation and see if the report that my doctors reported into the findings that you had, because I think you would find what happened very interesting.
Oh, I'd love to. Thank you very much. And I think Katherine can give you my email and it's all over online. I'd love to. Yes.
Yes, please. Thank you. And I plan on coming up to Palo Alto with a special program as soon as I can get it finished. Okay.
Oh, let's talk. Definitely. Awesome.
Absolutely. Yay. Thank you. Thank
You're
you so very, very much for both of you wonderful ladies for the work you're doing, because it's phenomenal. I can't begin to tell you what it does for all of the 94 million people around the world that sustain TBI every year.
I'm especially thankful to Katherine because I would be just a scientist behind a computer and wearing a lab coat if it wasn't for her. So it really has brought all these wonderful scientists together to I mean, now everything's virtual. If we don't talk about what we're doing, we're not going to go anywhere. We're not even going to get patients to study. So this is really important work.
May I
Yes.
ask a question about the neurostimulation and that type of treatment, and how it's your measurements is looking at like the premorbid conditions different for men and women. So how then does that impact when, if, you know, that treatment should be done? Like how is that determined, and what are like the qualifications or the criteria? Is it different for men and women? And also at what stage of recovery can that be used?
Oh, it's wonderful questions. So I can also send 2 more papers to Katherine that actually I've written with my collaborators at USIS, which is Uniform Service University, and also at Northwestern. Actually, I think Teresa wrote an article in the Brain Injury Professional, didn't she? Teresa Pape?
Oh,
Yeah.
no, that is something else though, but not in our.
Oh, okay. So those 2 papers actually list out very specifically the frequency, the exact protocol, the time that it should be used. And so these are very important questions. Like as in other clinical populations, so you have stroke population, you have other types of developmental brain injuries and not acquired. You certain time span you need for your brain to be rehabilitated before you stimulate it. Now there are people using neuromodulation, brain stimulation, not just with magnets, but also with low intensity focused out. And they're doing it in people who are comatose. And I am writing a paper on it, but I've never done it myself. So I'm not gonna talk about that. What we do is mild and moderate traumatic injury. So we follow the criteria that the VA, ACRM, DOD have developed. We follow the guidelines. For RTMS, I say it has to be 3 months post-injury. So your brain has had that time to heal. There is a slight chance of having a seizure, depending on your comorbidity. Everything has to be regulated to the T. FDA has to approve everything. You cannot be on any seizure medication. You cannot have any metal in your brain. And there are certain risk assessments you have to do. And I believe in getting an MRI to locate the area where you're stimulating. So my brain, I've been talking, is different from a man's brain. We know that. Well, if it gets injured, it's going to be even more different. So if I'm going to sit there and say, oh, I'm going to go from here and locate the dorsolateral prefrontal, I am not a neurologist. I'm not comfortable with that. I need to have an MRI and I need to locate your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex with a magnet in front of me. No one's going to tell me where it is. And because you have a brain injury, it's going to be a different location. And if you have metal in your brain, you can't go into the MRI. So those are some of the basic criteria that you have to be very careful about when you're doing stimulation. Kara, did I answer all of them, or was there another
No,
question?
you did. I guess just one other thing I could say is that if it is a scattered, you know, if there are injuries in different areas, like how is it determined, or you just are able to see through the MRI? Like, which areas do you think would be most,
So
I guess,
yeah,
receptive or
very,
beneficial?
very good question. So there are only, in my opinion, there are only certain areas of the brain that have been currently researched to receive this type of stimulation. So we do dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And remember, one of the things that is really important about this type of stimulation is you're going to either do excitatory or inhibitory. So if you're trying to get the neurons to talk and get this neurotransmitter to flow between two neurons, you're going to, sometimes you need to excite them, right? But if you're trying to bring it down, you're going to inhibit them. And that you can do with different frequencies. The 10 hertz meaning high, 1 hertz meaning low. What's also important is that you focus on areas that have been done in research and have been clinically translated. So dorsolateral prefrontal is one, motor cortex is where we use to find the threshold at what we stimulate, parietal cortex. So not all over the brain. Also, each area is connected to, going back to the corpus callosum question that was there, each area is connected to different parts of the brain through your white matter fiber tracts, and you can connect them. So when you stimulate a certain area, it's not just that area that's getting stimulated, it's the connectivity that you can actually study, right? So you can go back and forth on different levels. And one last thing I'm going to say is, in the article, you said about men and women, pregnancy is not the only issue. Whether a woman has had menopause is an issue. You have to know and it's very also important to ask them, or maybe take a blood test or a quick urine sample to figure out what stage of their menstrual cycle they are. That's an important fact that needs to be done, and we don't do it enough. In epilepsy research, they found that there is more excitation a certain phase of the menstrual cycle in women, in non-epileptic women versus epileptic, with RTMS. This paper just came out. So if you have epilepsy and you're getting RTMS, your response to that treatment is going to depend on what phase you are in your menstrual cycle.
Wow, that is absolutely
Boom.
fascinating.
Like, and there's only one paper, guys, so don't totally get freaked out. But
All right,
a lot more research has to be done.
We were given a 15 extra minutes, and we're coming to the end of our extra 15 minutes. I want to do a speed question. If you can answer in a sentence or two. Were the studies that didn't report sex differences underpowered in your scoping review?
Yes.
And then was there a minimum number of participants for this review to be included?
Yeah, I think we did more than 20.
Was a question about menopause, which I think you answered. Is there a difference in referral prevalence of TBI in women to men in the military?
Yes, I think so. But I can give you more papers on that. There is a referral, but
there's definitely a number of comments to share your papers, which we are very good at sharing links. So we'll send out a follow-up with a link to this call and a link to Maheen's paper that we mentioned. Also a link to Brain Injury Professional magazine, which Maheen's article is included in. It's also in the email that you got today that said you could click to the 2 week ago call with Eve and Johnny. If you click that link, there's also a link there to the magazine, which you can download as a PDF, or you can actually read on a way where you can actually turn pages on the laptop. Let me just see other questions. Somebody was saying they had a difficult time getting numbers of active guard reserve people, including women, in the military with a TBI at the state level. Have you ever seen lists like that at the state level, or mostly national?
So I just finished serving on the California TBI Advisory Board, and there are differences that I'm seeing, same thing that I'm seeing in the civilian population as well. I don't know about at the state level, but I don't know about the National Guard and other services.
And then, okay, there's actually now in the chat line, there is the link to the magazine. We could probably do one more question. Anyone else have a burning desire out there? Maheen is amazing. Like I can go out to dinner and we can have a 3-hour dinner in 2 seconds. She's fascinating to talk to and a really great person. I love that I've had friends with you. She's had me stay at her house, her kids, her dog. I just, you know, you're an amazing person. So my life is very enriched by you. So I am.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I did have a question specifically addressing the topic about women in the military. I was wondering if there was a difference in how these TBIs were reported as far as the mechanism of injury.
So there are falls, there are fewer blasts. There are falls, there's domestic violence also, and there's some sports injury, even in the military. So in fact,
military sexual trauma, which has.
Yes, so absolutely true. Let me just give you the numbers. I actually wrote them down because I knew somebody would ask me this question. So in the military, you have 30% likely to have PTSD is women, 4 times more substance abuse. And it seems like 92% of the females who have reported domestic violence with TBI, they've been hit in the head. And 1/5 of veteran females screen for IPV, which is intimate partner violence. So this is actually reported in the brain injury article. So the mechanism of TBI is different in men versus women. And that, of course, you know, these are really complicated issues, and we have to, when we match data for analysis, I mean, we have to really address these issues. And I know one of my wonderful colleagues, Dr. Carrie Yusupenko, does intimate partner violence research. And I know that in terms of the brain mechanism, when you are doing strangulation, that causes a different type of brain damage than if you get hit by something on the head, because strangulation would actually cause loss of oxygen to the brain, and it shows up as a different thing when you do an MRI as opposed to if you get hit on the head. So that question is incredibly important.
We have a number of research. We have something called the Domestic Violence Task Force in Pink Concussions, and I think we're up to like 240 members across 9 countries. Every 3rd month, we do a military talk. Tara has done talks, Maheen, Katherine Iverson. So if you go to Pink Concussions and you go to the task force and list the calls, there are some specific presentations on that other people have talked about their papers. Overall, the prevalence of domestic violence in a female veteran is twice the prevalence of her civilian counterpart. So it is a piece, and then it's also concerning too with veterans, the level of access to firearms too, also with suicide. So there are factors about being a veteran that complicate these matters that are really important to address. And that's why, you know, Pink Concussions keeps such a tight relationship with people that are working in the military and working in these studies. The other thing I want to say about the VA is we're talking mostly with women being the victim or the person that experiences the domestic violence, and the male being the person that uses domestic violence. When I was a social worker back in the days, 1992, my first case working at the VA was actually a male veteran who was abused, hit, traumatized by a woman. And he, in his experience from Vietnam, felt like in some way in surviving, he deserved the abuse that he was. So it was all tangled up. And so one of the things about the VA that I have to put credit out there is they're working with both sides of the equation. They're working with people perpetrating the violence, and they're working with people that are on the receiving end. And there are not a lot of organizations that are working in both, and just even how they use their language and what they refer. So, you know, the VA does a lot of amazing work. They're researchers. I want to thank you, Maheen. We are at the end of our extra 15-minute inning. I can't believe it's 71 people that stayed on for the extra 15 minutes. You are fascinating. Thank you so much for being here. If you want to have a minute or so to sum up anything.
I should have started with this, but I didn't. All these things that I said are my opinion and my opinion alone. So you can't put anybody responsible for what I said. It's my research, my opinions. And I think what's also important is that I think another important thing that comes out of the research that we do, even though that we target, we are looking at women and we're looking at and compare, we wouldn't be able to do this without the support of men. That's a really important issue. Leadership still has a lot of men, and they need to support us. We're rising slowly. Women are gaining the leadership positions, and but we need the support of men. And a lot of the things that we are trying to find out with effects of PTSD and depression, especially in reporting of TBI. So the same thing goes for men. I remember about 12 years ago, or when I was, I didn't know anything except, ooh, the brain. So I remember I was talking to a veteran and I was doing some neuropsych testing before an MRI, and he was a PTSD the veteran. And I was kind of irritated by the fact that he never reported his TBI, because I'm like, you got a brain injury, why didn't you report it? I was kind of mad at him, and we were just having a conversation. And he basically said they would have taken my firearm away from me. And you know how horrible that is to walk around and everyone has a gun and I don't. This is like 12 years ago, and it changed my perspective. Then I talked to a woman who had fallen, and while she was in boot camp from an exercise, and women are told, you're weak. What are you doing? Why are you going into the military? I mean, you can't handle this. I grew up with 3 brothers, so I know what that is. I tried to do everything they did just to prove them wrong, and which sometimes I succeeded and sometimes I didn't. And so she said that she didn't report it because the same thing. She said, I didn't want to be singled out as the weak one. So she went to bed, woke up, and went to the boot camp again. And then at night, she came back. She'd never reported it. So however we're finding these intricacies, I think they can be applied to both. So we're not just helping women, we're also helping men. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you so much. I want to thank the men that joined this call. I do want to thank, the original Pink Concussions, the original launch we had was because Dr. Chris Giza at in Los Angeles, Dr. Chris Giza signed his name under mine for the first Pink Concussion conference. And
he's awesome.
Yeah, the dean of Georgetown Medical School gave me the facility for free, and Dr. Brian Hainline at the NCAA gave me $20,000, which then I could go out and triple that money to run the first conference. So I'm really grateful to the men in leadership that felt like this was important enough, and hence this is why we're here today, because those doors were open for us. So thank you for the men that joined. Thank you for the women that joined. Thank you for talking about this topic. We'll be back next week with another conversation. Thank you, Maheen, and we'll send out a follow-up with the recording and list to all the articles that Maheen talked about. So have a great day. Stay safe. Wear a mask. See you later.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.